The sun was falling low over the red desert hills, painting the sky in colors of fire and gold. Dust swirled with the evening wind as the cowboy, named Caleb Hart, rode his brown horse through the canyon trail. He had been out since dawn, checking the far fences of his ranch. It was the same quiet routine, the same dry wind, until something broke that calm. He heard a scream, sharp, terrified, echoing off the stones. He froze, gripping the reins tighter. That sound wasn't from any animal. It was human. He turned his horse fast and rode toward the cry. The sound came again, weaker this time, from the dry riverbed below. Caleb slid off his saddle and ran down the slope. His boots hit the dirt hard, sending stones tumbling. Then he saw her, a young Apache woman lying near a clump of rocks, clutching her leg. Her dark hair was tangled with dust, her breathing short and shaky. "Hey, you hurt?" he shouted as he came closer. Her eyes lifted, one dark, wide, full of fear. She pointed to her leg. That's when he saw the twin puncture marks just above her ankle, 2 small holes already swelling, the skin turning deep purple, a rattlesnake coiled nearby, still watching, its tail twitching. Caleb didn't think. He grabbed his rifle and sent one shot into the ground near the snake. The sound echoed and the rattler slithered away into the brush. He dropped beside the woman, his hat falling off. "Snake bite?" he asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded, trembling. "It struck me when I was gathering herbs," she said, her voice weak but steady. "I tried to tie it, but it burns." Her hand gripped a strip of fabric she had tied above the wound, but it wasn't tight enough. Caleb pulled out his knife and cut another strip from his bandana. He tied it firm above her calf to slow the poison. She winced but didn't complain. "You're lucky I was nearby," he muttered, pressing the knot tight. "I prayed someone would come," she whispered. He looked at her face, sweat beading her skin, her breathing shallow. He knew she didn't have long. The venom was spreading fast. He had seen it before. A man bit on the leg could be gone within the hour. Caleb swallowed hard. There was only one way to draw out the poison before it reached her heart. It was an old method, dangerous and rough, but better than letting her die. He looked at her leg again, at the swelling rising like fire under her skin. "Listen," he said quietly. "There's something I gotta do. It ain't pretty, but it might save your life." She looked at him, her eyes faint but brave. "Do what you must, cowboy," she said softly. He nodded once, then bent down and pressed his lips to the wound, drawing hard and spitting the venom into the dirt. The taste was bitter and sharp, burning his mouth, but he didn't stop. He did it again and again, working fast, keeping the blood flowing. She gripped the dirt with her fingers, holding back cries of pain. He could feel her trembling under his hands, her life slipping if he didn't hurry. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the bleeding slowed. The color in her face began to return just a little. Caleb wiped his mouth and tied a clean cloth around her leg. He looked at her again. She was breathing, still alive. "You're gonna make it," he said quietly. She tried to smile, but her voice was faint. Why would you help me? My people and yours. We're not friends." He sat back on his heels and looked toward the horizon. The wind carried the last light of day across the desert. "Doesn't matter," he said after a long moment. "You were in trouble. That's all I needed to know." For a while there was only silence, the sound of crickets starting their song and the soft whisper of wind through the brush. Caleb got to his feet and lifted her gently in his arms. She was light, but her body was burning with fever. "Easy now," he murmured. "We gotta get you to my cabin before night hits." She tried to protest, saying she didn't want to be a burden, but her strength gave out. Her head fell against his chest. Caleb carried her up the slope, step by careful step, his boots slipping on the loose rock. His horse waited at the top, snorting softly as the wind picked up the scent of dust and blood. He lifted her onto the saddle, holding her steady as he climbed up behind. Her head rested near his shoulder, her breathing ragged but still there. The ride back to his ranch was long and quiet. The sun vanished, leaving only the glow of twilight and the pale moon rising over the mesas. Caleb rode fast but careful, feeling her grow colder in his arms. He whispered to keep her awake. "Don't you sleep on me now," he said. "We're almost home." She stirred, whispering something in her native tongue, a word he didn't know but could feel carried gratitude. By the time they reached his cabin, the night had fallen deep and the stars were blazing across the black sky. He brought her inside and laid her on his bunk. The fire crackled low, throwing warm light across the wooden walls. He fetched clean water, herbs, and the old medicine kit he kept for his horses. He washed her leg carefully, changing the cloth and pressing a poultice of crushed leaves to ease the swelling. Her skin was hot and he could tell the fever was trying to take her again. He sat beside her through the night, feeding the fire, making sure she didn't stop breathing. At times she mumbled in her sleep, words about her tribe, her mother, and the herbs she was gathering. Caleb listened quietly, understanding none of it but feeling the weight of it all. She was far from her people, hurt and alone, and somehow he had become her only hope. When the first light of dawn came through the window, he was still there, watching her chest rise and fall. The swelling had begun to ease, the color returning to her face. For the first time since sunset, he let himself breathe. He leaned back in his chair and whispered, "You're safe now, miss. You're gonna see another sunrise." Outside, the desert woke slowly. Coyotes calling in the distance, the smell of morning dust and sagebrush drifting through the door. Caleb stepped out to fetch more water, the sky turning pink over the cliffs. He looked back inside once more. She was still asleep, peaceful this time. He knew this wasn't the end of their story. Out here, every meeting meant something. Fate didn't cross paths without reason. And deep down, he felt that saving her life was only the beginning of something much larger, something neither of them could yet understand. The next morning came bright and silent. The fire in the cabin had burned low, and Caleb opened the door to let in the golden light. The world outside was calm, the desert stretching endlessly, the air cool from the night before. He turned back toward the bunk where the Apache woman still lay resting. Her breathing was steady now, her face no longer pale. The worst was over. Caleb walked to her side quietly, setting down a bowl of water and some fresh bandages. Her leg was still swollen, but the color was improving. He had done what he could. Now it was up to her strength to pull through. After a moment, she opened her eyes. The look in them was softer this time, full of life again. "You stayed all night," she said weakly. "Couldn't just leave you here to fend for yourself," Caleb replied with a small smile. "How you feeling?" "Alive," she whispered. "Thanks to you." Caleb nodded, busying himself with changing the cloth around her leg. She watched him quietly, noticing the roughness of his hands. Hands used to work, not care. Yet his touch was gentle, careful not to cause pain. "Do you have a name?" he asked after a while. "Niara," she said softly. "It means one who listens in my language." He looked up and smiled. "Fitting. You got the quiet kind of strength." She smiled faintly, her eyes warming. "And you, cowboy? What's your name?" "Caleb Hart," he said simply. "Most folks just call me Hart." The room grew quiet again, filled only with the soft crackle of the fire. Outside, the wind moved across the plains, stirring the grass and whistling through the cracks in the wooden walls. Niara looked around the cabin. It was small but clean. There were tools, an old saddle, a kettle hanging above the fire, and a single photograph on the shelf. It was faded, showing a man and a woman, probably his parents. "You live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Been that way a long time. My folks passed years ago. I keep the ranch going. It's quiet out here, just me and the horses most days." Niara's gaze softened. "Silence can be heavy," she said. He paused, glancing at her. "Yeah," he agreed quietly. "Sometimes it is." Over the next few days, Niara began to heal. The fever broke and her strength returned little by little. Caleb helped her walk short distances outside the cabin, supporting her as she leaned on him. The desert air was warm and clean, and each morning the sun rose in colors that looked almost like a promise. She told him stories about her people, how they lived by the rivers and hunted under the stars. She spoke of songs her mother used to sing to call the rain, and how her father taught her to find healing herbs in the wild. Caleb listened, truly listened, as if each word painted a picture in his mind. In return, he told her about ranch life, the early mornings, the wild horses he broke, the endless work that never seemed to end. They came from two worlds that rarely met, but somehow in the quiet space between sunrise and sunset, they found a strange peace together. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the desert red, Niara stood near the fence, her leg still bandaged but strong enough to hold her weight. Caleb was nearby, fixing a post. "You work without rest?" she said softly. He looked up from his task, smiling a little. That's ranch life. Work's never done. You saved my life and now you keep me safe here, she said, her eyes thoughtful. In my tribe, when someone saves another, their spirits become tied together. We say the great sky remembers the act forever. Caleb straightened, brushing dirt from his gloves. I just did what anyone would have done. Not anyone, she said quietly. Others might have walked away. He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him. That night the wind grew strong, carrying the sound of thunder far off in the distance. Rain was rare in that land, but when it came fierce. Caleb secured the shutters and made sure the horses were safe in the barn. Niara helped him, limping but determined. As lightning flashed across the sky, the two of them stood together by the door, watching the storm roll in. The thunder echoed off the cliffs, shaking the ground. For a moment, Niara's hand brushed against his arm. It wasn't planned, just a quiet touch, a wordless thank you for everything he had done. You're not afraid of storms? He asked. No, she said, her voice steady. Storms are only the sky reminding us that even peace needs to roar sometimes. Caleb looked at her, and something in her words struck deep. He saw strength in her, not just the kind that fights to survive, but the kind that rises after pain and keeps walking. When the rain finally came, it beat hard against the roof. They sat by the fire, sharing what little food he had, beans, bread, and a cup of coffee he poured for her, though she found the taste bitter and laughed softly at it. You're the first to laugh in this house in a long time, he said quietly. Then, I have already repaid part of my debt, she replied. Gently, days turned into weeks. Niara could walk freely again, and her wound had healed, leaving only a faint scar. She began helping around the ranch, gathering wood, feeding the horses, even teaching Caleb how to mix herbs that kept away fever and snakebite. He didn't say it, but he began to rely on her company. The silence of the desert didn't feel heavy anymore. One morning, Niara told him she must return to her people. Her tribe would worry, and she could not stay forever among strangers. Caleb nodded slowly, though the thought of her leaving tightened something inside his chest. I understand, he said. Your people need you. She smiled softly. And you need someone to remind you that you are not alone, cowboy. He looked away, pretending to check the saddle, but his voice was quieter than usual. Guess I'll miss that reminder. When she mounted his horse, the same one that carried them through the night of her rescue, she turned to face him. The morning sun was rising behind her, glowing over her dark hair. Caleb Hart, she said. The great sky remembers what you did. So will I, he tipped his hat. Take care of yourself, Niara. She rode off slowly, the wind catching her long braid, the sound of hooves fading into the wide-open desert. Caleb stood there for a long time, watching the horizon until she was gone. For days after, her presence lingered. The faint scent of the herbs she used, the calm voice that had filled the silence of his cabin. He often found himself looking toward the east, half expecting to see her figure appear again on the trail. Weeks later, when he went out to mend fences near the canyon, he found something left on a rock, a small handmade pouch made from soft leather tied with a string. Inside was a single feather and a tiny carved stone shaped like a heart. He smiled, closing his hand around it. He knew who had left it and what it meant. The desert wind blew warm across his face, carrying the sound of distant drums. Caleb looked out toward the horizon and whispered, You're welcome, Niara. He climbed back onto his horse and rode toward home, the sun shining high above him. The land felt alive again, filled with memory and meaning. Somewhere out there, he knew she was looking at the same sky, and that was enough. Their paths had crossed by chance, but their spirits had met by fate. And in that wild, endless land where danger and beauty walked hand in hand, one cowboy and one Apache woman would always be remembered by the wind. As the day life, courage and kindness met under the burning desert sun.